Hello, I'm Dr. Molescu, and I'm going to do a short lesson on skin, the anatomy of skin. Hopefully, this study guide will really bring it home in terms of understanding the terminology, identifying the structures, and understanding the function of the structures with respect to the integumentary system. So we have basically three layers, and I have images for it. So the top three layers, so you have the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. So we're going to break it down and do a little micro lesson on all the elements of the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. So to circle back to the beginning, make sure that you understand the three major regions of the skin. Like I said, epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis, also known as subcutaneous deepest region. So the epidermis has layers, which we will go over. The dermis is a particular region which has a particular type of tissue and ancillary structures that happen to be in that region. And then the subcutaneous layer, also known as the hypodermis, basically all it contains is fat, vein, artery, and nerve. And the way I remember it is fat in a van. So fat, adipose tissue, vein, artery, nerve, van. Okay, so now let's go over what's located in the epidermis. Well, first of all, you have layers of stratified squamous epithelium, which are the flat cells at the top, stratified and keratinized with keratin as a protective barrier for the skin. In addition to those type of cells, we also contain the Merkel cells, the Langerhans cells, the melanocytes, and of course the keratinocytes, which produce the keratin layer for protection. So that's the epidermis. Now the cells of the epidermis, I think you should understand, their location, but you should also understand their function. So like I said, keratinocytes will make that fibrous protein called keratin that is the barrier for our skin. Melanocytes is the type of cell that produces the brown pigment melanin, and it is genetically based on your race, whether you produce a lot or little of melanin, but everyone has the same amount of melanocytes. In addition, we have Langerhans cells, which help fight off any potential pathogens. They are macrophages that digest, kind of like Pac-Man digesting in the game, right? So yeah, macrophages digest specific pathogens. And then Merkel cells are receptors, so that we have sensory nerve endings. These are sensory nerve ending receptors called Merkel cells, and it can sense deeper touch. Okay, so we also divide the epidermis into layers. So I like to come up with neat mnemonics, and the mnemonic that I have come up with is not always acceptable, but it's cute. Can Lucy grab Sam's, and I'll say booty. And like I said, it ain't appropriate, but it's cute and you remember it and you won't forget, because if she does that, she gets in big trouble. So can stands for stratum corneum, the outermost layer. Then comes stratum lucidum, which is right below stratum corneum. But stratum lucidum is this translucent layer that's only found in the palms and soles of the feet. Stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum basal. So the mnemonic, can Lucy grab Sam's booty? So let's go over it. So stratum corneum is also known as the outer layer of keratin, the horny layer, and it's a protective barrier. Stratum lucidum is translucent, transparent, and like I said, only found in thick skin, which is basically palms and soles of feet. All right. So palms of hands and soles of feet is stratum lucidum. Stratum corneum is the top layer. Stratum granulosum has 3 to 5 cell layers with keratinocytes and granules to accumulate in this layer. Then we come up to the final two. Let me scroll up, and you have stratum spinosum and stratum basal. So from the deepest to most superficial in this direction, right? So stratum spinosum is the prickly layer that contains the Langerhans cells and melanin granules, and stratum basal is the deepest layer in the dermis, almost attached to the dermis, but it's still part of the epidermis. So it's kind of like this transition between the epidermis and the dermis. All right, so the stratum basal is the deepest layer of the epidermis, undergoes lots of division and lots of cell division, mitosis, and it takes 20 to 25 days from when a cell is produced to when it is flaked off. All right, so C stands for can, right, stratum corneum, Lucy, grab, Sam's, and then if we scroll up, booty for basal or basal. All right, and that is pretty much it when it comes to understanding the epidermis. So let's do the next step. Let me just clear out all this. The next step is to go over the dermis. So in the dermis, that's the middle layer. It's composed of two types of tissue layers, papillary and reticular. It has a lot of flexibility because it has elastic connective tissue. It has fibroblasts, which are the star-shaped cells that are involved in healing, wound healing. Macrophages, which we already mentioned, are able to phagocytize pathogens. Mast cells, which are involved in releasing histamine and allergies associated with mast cells, and then the white blood cells. All right, now let's go over the layers. The papillary layer has areolar connective tissue, which contains all three types of fibers, the collagen, the elastic, and even the reticular. So mostly contains the Meissner corpuscles, which are free nerve endings, and some capillaries. Now, the reticular layer is 80% of the layer of the dermis, 80% of the thickness of the skin. It has mainly collagen fibers to add some strength, but it also contains elastin or elastic fibers to allow for stretch and recoil. And then finally, the hypodermis, which is the deepest layer. As you can see here, all that we have in the hypodermis is adipose tissue, vein, which is seen here in blue, artery in red, and nerve. Okay, and that's pretty much it. The rest, you can take a look at the study guide. It's going to go over all the definitions that we need to know, ancillary structures within the dermis and the hypodermis. So we talked about melanin producing the pigment. Keratin happens to also occur when we eat a lot of keratin in the food, like the carrots, and provide some coloring to our palms and soles if we eat too much. Hemoglobin provides the color of our skin based on how much hemoglobin we have. This is why people that have iron deficiency anemia appear very pale. Sweat glands, well, they're located in the dermis, and the sweat gland looks like a snake, coiled snake right here. That's a sweat gland. This is a receptor. This is the hair follicle. And then next to the hair follicle, you'll also see the erector pili muscle that causes goosebumps. And of course, the sebaceous gland, which releases sebum oil so that your hair and skin is not too dry. So in effect, I'm going to circle back to all the structures here and end this little micro lesson by going over all the structures visually, aside from the definitions that I gave you. So we mentioned the epidermis and all its layers, right? Can Lucy grab Sam's booty? So stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, right? Stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and then stratum basal. And then under that is this papillary layer that looks like waves. So let me clear that out so you can see these waves. So this papillary layer is right adjacent or below stratum basal. And then the rest of this area here of the dermis, so the dermis consists of the papillary and reticular, but the reticular layer contains all these structures, the hair follicle, the hair roots, the corpuscles, which are the nerve receptor endings, the coiled snake-like structure called the sweat gland, which releases sweat, the sebaceous gland, which releases sebum, All of these structures you must know in the dermis, and then of course the hypodermis, fat in a vein, right? Adipose tissue, vein, artery, and nerve. And that is my micro lesson for the day. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I will see you next time for another lesson in anatomy. Bye.